do they kind of knock it down to a certain number?
Mr. Chair, I don't have their criteria at my fingertips here, but they certainly do. They are going to be maintaining a lot of their existing operations along Hennepin, so they want to maintain that level of service that's expected today. Hennepin is also an arterial bus rapid transit corridor in the future, a planned corridor. So this design and kind of the traffic analysis that we did accommodated for that future service as well.
I guess I'll have to make myself more conversant of the frameworks Metro Transit might use. So, yeah, learning opportunity. Councilmember Gordon.
I was just thinking that I don't think we approved the complete streets policy when we were doing that thing over on 3rd. So we might have a new guiding document for us on Hennepin.
We certainly do. Any further questions, further presentation? Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for this preliminary work. Hope we have a good shot at getting the money so we can move forward expeditiously with this project. And the stakeholder interest in this is quite high, and the challenges are definitely out there, but we have high expectations. I know Nicollet was dubbed, Main Street, Minnesota, and there's a certain glamour to Nicollet Mall, but when I think of Hennepin growing up, or even now, that's where the action is. It's kind of like our main drag. It's a really important part of downtown Minneapolis, and you're a lucky guy to have that assignment. So thank you. So with that, I will move to approval of the concept plan as described by staff for the Hennepin Avenue Reconstruction Project between Washington Avenue and 12th Street for purposes of submitting a grant application. Any further discussion? See none, all in favor say aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Thank you. Moving to item 20, which is the Street Cafe Pilot Program presentation.
Mr. Chair, Mackenzie Turner Bargan will make that presentation.
I can still say good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Mackenzie Turner Bargan. I am an associate transportation planner in the Transportation Planning and Programming Division of Public Works. Thank you for having me this morning. I'm here to talk to you about a new pilot program that we have been planning and pulling together over the last few months. This is the Street Cafe Pilot Program. So we're going to start with kind of some of the existing programs at the City of Minneapolis that have informed where we're at now with introducing a pilot program of street cafes. So starting with our Sidewalk Cafe program. This is a program, as you can see here, this is one of our nice sidewalk cafes along Nicollet Mall in front of Brits. Nice ride, everything very, very vibrant in the photo there. So the Sidewalk Cafe program is a program that was last updated in 2009, but it's something that we've been operating for quite some time. It's a program of business licensing and CPED, actually. Sidewalk cafes are and should be a very important element of a vibrant public realm and pedestrian experience in a city. The City of Minneapolis currently has 243 licensed sidewalk cafes operating in Minneapolis. I knew we had a lot, but when I saw the final numbers, that was kind of shocking, but really exciting as well. Sidewalk cafes can support and enhance that pedestrian environment. However, we do have some locations within the City of Minneapolis where we have sidewalks that are narrow enough that we have constraints where, in order to appropriately balance the needs of pedestrians and needs of businesses and communities, that we are not able to allow sidewalk cafes at this time. Now we're going to jump to the Parklet program, another one of our existing programs currently at the city. This is a more recent program than the sidewalk cafes. It began in 2014 with a pilot program. As you can see here in this photo, this is one of our pilot structures that we placed in front of Juxtaposition Arts. They were our host for that summer, and they are located on Emerson Avenue North at West Broadway. Great partners. We had a really good turnout and experience with the pilot program that year. So again, that was 2014, and just to back up for a moment, those who aren't familiar with parklets, a parklet is a seasonal expansion of the existing sidewalk designed for the public to relax and enjoy the city. These structures take up 1 to 2 parking spaces. And in that pilot season, we had 3 structures owned by the city that we placed throughout the city in 3 different wards. In 2015, we put those structures back out in different locations for that year, but we also expanded the program to include an application-based program that would allow for community organizations or businesses to invest their own funds in applying to design and fund and place their own structure in the public right-of-way for public use. That year we had 5 structures, 3 city and 2 community-based. And now in 2016, we have continued those programs. This year we have 5 parklets that are out on the street today. Those 5 locations this year, the 3 city-owned structures are located at Twin Cities Coffee and Deli on Chicago Avenue at 16th Street, Smoke in the Pit Barbecue on Chicago Avenue just north of 38th Street, and Angry Catfish on 28th Avenue just south of 42nd Street, I believe is where that's located. And in addition, we have 1 returning community structure that is funded by the Carrick neighborhood that is placed on Lake Street in front of Morrissey's Irish Pub. So that's between Bryant and Colfax. So that has been a partnership in approval through the county, as that's one of their roadways. And then also we have an additional location this year in the North Loop neighborhood, located adjacent to the Velo Apartments on 2nd Street North, just off of the First Avenue intersection. We do also have a couple of additional applications working through the process, but it's not yet, remains to be seen whether those will go through this season or not. But one thing that has been consistent through the 3 years that we have had the Parklet program is the question from a number of interested parties as to whether or not these structures could ever be used for sidewalk cafe purposes assigned to specific businesses. So with that, we looked at the sidewalk cafe program. We looked at the parklet structures. Now that we had a process in place by which we could assess not only the siting and appropriate siting of a parklet structure, but also the appropriate design guidelines by which we could assess a custom design for one of these structures and approve a structure that would be able to be placed in a parking lane, an unrestricted parking lane, we felt that we were in a place to look at that and evaluate how that could be combined. And so you put those 2 things together and you get the street cafe program. So what are street cafes? Street cafes are structures that are placed in the roadway that serve as seating for ground floor serving businesses. Street cafes are permitted areas that function as seating for an adjacent restaurant or business. These are not open to the public as our public parklets are, but would function as an extension of a restaurant or cafe. The photo that you see here is a streetery. That's the name of these facilities in Seattle. We have chosen the name Street Cafe because we call them sidewalk cafes. In Minneapolis, we thought that a cafe, sidewalk cafe that has moved to the street would be more intuitive to the local community. So these are facilities that exist in Seattle, but also Portland and a number of other communities have both public parklet programs, but then also these structures that function as private cafes that are assigned to specific businesses. So here's just another view of these. You can see that this is actually on a fairly significant grade, but they have accommodated that appropriately to make it level and still accommodate ADA needs. So the Street Cafe pilot program. So essentially, this is a new sidewalk cafe site plan option that supports local business, provides opportunities for private investment in enhancing the public realm, and really helps manage demands on the pedestrian environment. We really see these as another enhancement of the pedestrian environment. It makes it a more interesting, more vibrant, and comfortable place to exist as a pedestrian, but also provides those additional benefits to the communities. So in 2016, so this is going to be, we are proposing this as a 2-year pilot program. So in 2016, knowing that we would be looking at starting maybe as early as August, if possible, if they're interested parties, and we would entertain up to 5 pilot locations in 2016 later in the season. Moving into 2017, knowing that we may only get half of a season this year and knowing that we want to collect as much information as possible as this program evolves, we wanted to include 2017 as a additional full pilot season, but we would accept up to 5 additional pilot locations in that year. So we've had support for exploring this option across a variety of stakeholder groups, including business districts, business improvement districts, council members, as well as Public Works and CPED staff. And again, this would be a seasonal program for Minneapolis, just the same as our sidewalk cafes and our parklet program is currently. Also, I should mention that this has all been in close communication and consideration and collaboration with Grant Wilson of our business licensing program. They are the ones who operate our sidewalk cafe program. And since this is really a expansion of a site plan option for those facilities, it is leveraging the process and the program that he has in place, but just offering that additional option. So here's an example of some of the configurations. Exhibit 1 shows you the sidewalk cafe, kind of the typical sidewalk cafe configuration you would see out there today, typically right adjacent to the storefront. Option 2 shows you the typical placement of a parklet, or what would be a street cafe now, with that specific type of operation in 1 to 2 parking spaces. Figure number 3 shows an extended street cafe in 1 to 2 parking spaces. So this might be an additional option to allow for a little extra space where you could not only utilize a parklet structure in an unrestricted parking zone, but also some of the furnishing zone space that might exist between, our tree plantings and our street lights and other elements that may be in that furnishing zone, but still outside of that pedestrian clear zone that we need to keep open for pedestrians that are using the sidewalks. And lastly, we did want to make it clear that we want to try to maintain that clear and predictable pedestrian kind of accessible path of travel for pedestrians. And so we want to try to not have a split kind of situation where we have the facade adjacent piece and then the street piece to try to keep it. I guess part of the state statute requires that your sidewalk cafe be a compact and contiguous space. And so this just addresses that component. So some next steps. So we've been having discussions about fees and permitting. Some of that has led to just conversations about, I think the path that we've gone down as of right now is that we want to make this a program that is intuitive, that is easy to access. And so right now we're looking at whether or not the sidewalk cafe program permits and fees are adequate to move this along, just with an additional kind of slightly adjusted review process for the addition of the on-street structure. And then also moving forward to connect with eligible businesses. One of the more interested parties has been businesses along First Avenue North. If you're familiar with that area, we have quite a constrained right-of-way with the sidewalk there, as well as really large volumes of pedestrians due to event traffic in that area. And so any opportunity to provide additional outdoor seating as well as additional kind of clear space for pedestrians to use is a benefit. And then additionally, we want to provide guidance and informational resources for design and implementation of these street cafes. And then as this program evolves, we will take everything that we're learning through the pilot program and hopefully be able to apply that to the program as it moves along. And with that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions per the presentation? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll just make a quick comment that I know we considered this when we were initially looking at parklets, whether or not to make them allowed to be private spaces instead of public spaces. And I think, so I'm glad that we started with just allowing for public spaces in our parklets. I do think that this is a reasonable move to make as a pilot in Minneapolis. I think we'll probably see a lot more of them allowing for private spaces. I would note that I think it's unusual. So Long Beach does this, but most cities actually require their parklets to be public spaces. So just, we would be making a shift in how we are treating these parklet-like spaces, now allowing them to be private spaces. And again, because I think we will see more of them, and I think that's a good thing. And I think, we have a lot of commercial corridors in the neighborhoods that are constrained sidewalk space where sidewalk cafes either don't fit, or if they do, it's really narrowing out the through space for walking. I think it's a good move, but it's a change in how we're treating these spaces. And so anyway, I appreciated you going through it. I appreciate that it's a pilot. I think it is a good step. And I also just appreciate all of your work on this and everything else you've done for the city in your time here. We're really sad that you're leaving.
I'll echo that sadness. It's been great working with you, and of course we're in good hands because you set this particular program up in such a good way, and the other work you've done with the pedestrian, kind of fostering the pedestrian advisory committee that we celebrated today, had a lot to do with you as well. And so I've lost you as a constituent, and I'm losing you as a staff person, but you're going to a good place at PennDOT, I believe, and so you'll be in the mix making these things happen at a bigger playing ground. So. That's great. Any further questions? Oh, Councilmember Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, I was just, and I'm not super familiar with this program, but I remember that St. Paul had worked on a program that would allow a parking space to be used as sort of an extension of a private business, I think. And I was curious how this program compares to that. And I thought that was, again, kind of more for the retail spaces like a restaurant, and that they could then make a choice to put something in the parking space.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, I'm not familiar actually with St. Paul's program as of currently. I have seen that they have some structures that have gone out on the street recently that look similar to parklets, but I don't know what their particular program or pilot programs might look like at this time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And I'll just add thank you for your work. It's been a pleasure working with you, and you've taught me a lot about thinking about pedestrian and public space. So thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Again, thank you. And I also wanted to comment the value of the parklets and the publicness of that. I'm glad that's still in the mix, and I think I'll continue to encourage that being in the mix. I think even if it's part and parcel of advancing the notion in maybe communities that haven't participated, what a great tool we have to be an ambassador for the concept in other areas.
Mr. Chair and committee members, just one more thing to say on that front is I think that because of the nature of some of the locations where we have seen, where we've encouraged public parklets to be present, where we have kind of those complementary adjacent land uses of, maybe kind of grab and go options or coffee shops or cafes, businesses that might be smaller. I think that there is still very much a role for the public parklets to play in that that could be perhaps a more affordable option of this same type of activation of space, knowing that the additional business licensing fees that come along with a sidewalk cafe space and operation of that space is not part of that. But so kind of the same activation of the space, but different uses, and also one may be more attainable for certain businesses than the other. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to grow both of these in different areas of the city.
It seems our ambitions around equity might encourage us to go in that direction. So thank you. Thanks again. So with that, I will move receiving the Street Cafe Pilot Program presentation and supplement parklet application manual. This will also be referred to the CDRS committee, as noted, who manages the enforcement of this. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Thanks a lot. Our last item today is the Southwest Corridor Light Rail Transit Final Environmental Impact Statement Comments. Director Cerny.
Mr. Chair, Paul Miller is here to do the presentation, and I'd like to also note Jim Alexander, the director of the Southwest LRT project, is here if there are additional questions for him.
Good morning.
Morning. Still morning?
Yes.
So, as Lisa said, I'm Paul Miller with the TP, Transportation Planning and Programming Division, and I'm the city's project manager assigned to the Southwest LRT project. I've got a short presentation I put together today to talk about staff comments and follow up with questions. And as Lisa said, Jim Alexander with the Met Council is here to help answer questions. We received the publication of the final environmental impact statement, the FEIS, on the 13th of May. Met Council will be receiving comments up to the 13th of June. After today, we would submit on the 13th of June a set of draft comments based on our council cycle, and then we would formalize comments and submit formal comments to the Met Council after City Council meeting on the 17th. And that follows similar practice that we've had on past documents where due dates and council cycles try to jive together. So my presentation, just going to talk briefly about what's in the FEIS. The guidelines that we were given to comment on the FEIS, and really, I think I'll say the bulk of our comments, which was really a preface that staff felt was important to make at this time, and then we'll follow up with some questions and answers. The FEIS, or final environmental impact statement, is really a culmination of the work of the Met Council on the draft environmental impact statement and the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. And it basically talks about the project's purpose and need. It covers alternatives and consideration of all those alternatives. And then it really contains a series of analysis of a variety of topics from environmental, transportation, financial, environmental equity, parkland, historic properties, and then really gets into all of the comments that were received at both the DEIS, the SDIS, and the Met Council's responses to those comments. And that's what's contained in the document. The guidelines provided by the council, and really based on state rules, talk about that the document is adequate, is really what it's getting at, and that it really is determined adequate based on three standards. That it addresses the significant issues and alternatives raised during the process, that it provides responses to all the comments received, and then it was basically put together per the Minnesota rules. Based on those guidelines, staff has determined that the document is adequate. However, after reviewing the comments, staff felt really strongly that it was important to go beyond just the adequacy of the document and to restate our previous concerns that council has made at all of the past actions. And those include a number of resolutions that came out of the original municipal consent in 2014, and then resolutions at the municipal consent in 2015. And those covered areas, freight rail location, and the LPA, or locally preferred alternative, and then freight rail safety. And so those resolutions are actually included as an attachment to our comments, and really are kind of the basis, or the start of the basis, of our preface to the comments. Some of the areas that we really wanted to, I'll say, concentrate on or make additional statements, the lead being safety and security. I guess tantamount to that is freight rail safety and the issues that come from that. And we have the advantage, based on circumstance, with the drafting of the environmental impact statement, but also having proceeded through design to an almost complete point. So a lot of the mitigations that were addressed in the document are actually occurring. And so the project office has worked on an operations emergency management plan, a safety and security management plan, and there is what they call a fire life safety and security committee. The city of Minneapolis, in my preface, has stressed how important it is that the city be part of that process. And to that end, we have been. The Minneapolis Fire Department and John Friedel and his staff have been included in discussions throughout the project, and will continue to be, and are actually already participating even with the city of St. Louis Park in emergency planning. And they will continue to be. That also goes not only for the construction period of time, but also after construction is complete and we get into operations. And so that emergency planning for how you deal with emergencies when there's a train on the track. And so that Minneapolis Fire Department and Police Department have been and will continue to be involved in those discussions. It's just important that we stress that how important that is that we continue to be included. One other area in safety is pedestrian connections. And this is really in the Kenilworth corridor and what is referred to as an at-grade crossing. And as I think all of you are aware, if you're familiar with the corridor, there are a multitude of informal crossing points over the existing tracks in the corridor. Those places, that I'll say crossing of the tracks by pedestrians and bicyclists occur today informally, pretty much unchecked. It's really kind of out of sight, out of mind at this point. There really needs to be a recognition that once operations of LRT take place, that the at-grade crossings, those informal crossings, will need to be addressed. And we want to make sure that the council includes that as part of their safety and security management plan. Excuse me. Right now, it's very informal. Once the project is completed, there'll be a lot of fences and railings separating freight, LRT from the private property. But these really are not the kinds of fences and railings that are going to prevent people from hopping the fence or crossing. So it's really important that this is something that the Met Council addresses once operations start. On the subject of at-grade crossings, just as a side note, this was addressed as part of the multimodal traffic study, which was also done for the project. And we did identify a number of locations to actually create formal at-grade crossings. They're not in the project at this point, but they've been identified, and future funding would be sought after to try and get some of those included. One particular at-grade crossing at the Westlake Station area would very likely be one of the first ones that we would try to incorporate. The project office is actually going to provide the underground utility infrastructure for that at-grade crossing as part of the project. So some of that work will be done in expectation that an at-grade crossing could be put in at that location. The next area that we really wanted to stress is construction mitigation. There will be a construction management plan developed, and actually it's I'll say in development already. But kind of or I should say one of the key areas, I think, as you are all aware, when it comes to issues of construction, is the construction of the Kenilworth Tunnel. And two areas specifically that come to mind that are, I think, of great concern to everybody are vibration and what that could do potentially to adjacent buildings and structures, and the impacts of the construction on groundwater. Excuse me. To that end, there is already a basis of design document being created by the Met Council. It talks about construction methods for the tunnel, and one of the areas that they're really concentrating on is a way to put in sheet piling without using vibratory methods. The method is one of the methods being considered is what they call pushed in place piling. And it's really to avoid that vibration that would cause potential damage to adjacent properties. As far as groundwater, the method that they're proposing for tunnel construction is really a cellular method in which they would build the tunnel in smaller sections. That tunnel would be built, I think the easiest way to describe it is like a bathtub. And it would be completely sealed and waterproofed so that there would not be, the important part, there would not be a constant groundwater dewatering system taking place. That's kind of the key to that. And the city's, I'll say the Public Works Department following that completion of the basis design is something that we would insist on and continue to be involved in.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly on that point, I know we had emailed about this. I just wanted to state that, this has been a point of, I'm sure, as you know, a lot of concern from constituents who live near the lakes and folks who use the lakes. And I know how much work staff has done to communicate with our constituents. Councilmember Goodman and I were able to go to our neighborhood organizations thanks to information that now Director Cerny gave us back then. But we did do a staff direction. I just wanted to kind of restate that back when we were discussing the SDEIS, which is very strongly worded about at any time if new information comes forward about direct or indirect impacts on our waters through this construction phase, that we would expect a report back from staff, including potential legal actions. And that was a very strong statement that this council made, unanimously approved. I know our staff engineers are working with the Met Council. I know no one wants anything to happen to the lakes, but it's such a high priority for everyone that I just wanted to restate that we had taken that action, and we're counting on everyone to just stay on top of that issue. We hope we don't ever have to get to that point, but we did make that commitment as a council as a backup last resort plan. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Benner, and I can assure you that that is something that we've been concentrating on throughout the whole process. And I guess I would say that we're really happy to see that the basis of the design for the tunnel has proceeded to this point and really satisfied our needs up to this point.
And I'll just say thanks for including that emphasis, Councilmember Bender. And a lot of what we're doing in as staff had indicated, we don't want to lose sight of our decision-making processes as we go along. Big, long projects have these decision points, and it's easy to lose track of how the conversations move forward. I also want to note we're joined by Councilmember Lisa Goodman, who probably more than anyone, elected or otherwise, has been involved in this project and representing our constituents and these issues before us. So, and I think a big important thing why we want to keep this in front of us, we should be clear-eyed about the impacts haven't gone away just because those particular decisions happened before us. So I just wanted to emphasize that part of what we're doing today.
Mr. Chair, agreed. A couple other things that I wanted to touch on before we get to Q&A. The post-construction LRT operations, one of the biggest issues that we have been dealing with throughout the project is noise and noise mitigation. Post-construction, we wanted to stress with the council that that analysis of noise and noise mitigation can't just end at the end of design, that it really needs to continue after operations. And the ability to respond to noise complaints and to make adjustments in the field is something that we feel is really important and will insist on. And one of the last areas really gets to visual impact. And this is something I just wanted to bring up, and I think it's an area where we've got, I think, some positive influence on the project. This is a result of the MOU related to the project design, and it's really, I think the highlight of that MOU is the Kenilworth Corridor landscaping design. And how the success of that design will really add to or help with this idea of visual impact. The documents for that design are available. If you're interested, I can either make those available to you, or they are available on the Met Council project site. But that design was completed with, I'll say, very significant community input. I think it's been something that's really successful. Coming out of that design, not only is it a restoration of the landscape in the corridor, but through that process, the consultants were able to actually identify trees that were scheduled to be removed, a significant number of trees that actually could be saved as part of that process. So I'll say we've decreased the tree loss through that process. And then a couple of things that are important to that design is the construction of the corridor landscaping will be done under a separate contract to the Met Council. So the landscape contractor will not be working for the general. It'll be something we can deal with directly. And then between the Met Council and the Park Board, we were able to extend the operations and maintenance period for the landscaping Typically, you'd see a 1-year warranty or maintenance period for landscaping. We've actually extended that period for a period of 3 additional years. So that's really a significant thing as far as landscape maintenance. So as I said, from a staff perspective, we had judged the document adequate. We provided the preface to that document. As far as participation, CPED, members of CPED were involved in the review, all of the various divisions in Public Works and also the City Attorney's Office. And with that, we can take questions.
I have one question that might be illustrative to people that are watching interested in this. What would have triggered, and I know we're keeping track of the longer conversation, but you had a specific sort of well-identified and articulated task before you in terms of adequacy or not adequacy. What would have triggered a contrary opinion, an opinion of inadequacy from staff? What would have triggered that? Just as an example, generic example, or specific.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, one of the very first things that I did when I got the document is just to verify that all of the Public Works, all of the city's previous comments, not only for the DEIS, but the SDIS were in the document, and that proper responses had been provided to each one of those comments. So that was kind of check one, had that been done. It would have been a really easy thing to obviously highlight that if that had not been done.
Any other questions for the presentation? Any other comments? Thank you for that work.